Thank you. I'm Courtney Kuketz. This is my first novel, my debut novel, I guess we could call it. I shouldn't tell you this. Like, I took a lot of inspiration from like where I grew up, the stories that I heard about my grandmother, things like that. I just kind of worked into my novel. So I think if you're from Central Mass, you can relate a lot to the places that are mentioned. I don't necessarily know if you'll relate to the actual stories, but I think the places might ring true. I hope they do. If not, I guess I failed, but I don't think so. To talk a little bit about myself, I am what would be considered an elder millennial. And I only say that, and it's a little bit relevant to the book, because the book really is about the split of generations, so the generation gaps that we see. Because how many of you hear people like use age as an insult? It doesn't matter if you're talking about younger people or older people. Like, oh, dumb millennials, you're a boomer, right? It's all this like back and forth between the different generations. So I use that not as insults in the book, but to hopefully show that there is a bridge between the generations that we kind of ignore, that life is universal. And so even though we've all been through these different things, like, it's not that different, hopefully. I hope that's what people take from my novel. Yeah. In the story, in the book, the basic idea here is that there are two women. There's one young woman who is college age. So she is considered maybe a cusp millennial, Gen Z, if you will, I guess. Sometimes it's hard to keep track of the different generations, what they're called. I have a breakdown here somewhere, but so anyone after, say, like 2005, we're going to consider Gen Z. And then from like late 80s to 2004, millennial. Not that it's super important, but it does help kind of understand the age and the difference that we see in the book. So our young millennial Gen Z character meets an older character who would be a boomer. And they exchange these stories that show them like, wow, we lived very similar lives. We've had these experiences that are not so different, even though, you know, we're kind of bred these days to think like there's this huge difference between people who are young and people who are old. But at the end of the day, those older individuals have been those younger ones too, and they probably had similar battles with the generations before them as well. So that's one thing that I'm hoping comes through in the book, is that the generations, although they're different, are not so different that they can't come together and see like, wow, we have a lot of similarities. To kind of give examples, in the book, there are some unflattering things that both women do. So we have the younger woman maybe having an affair with a professor. Very unflattering. And you don't think that an older person is going to relate to that. And although she had not been through that same experience, there is like understanding that exists there. Knowing that like, hey, life is not so easy, not so straightforward. So that's what I hopefully show, that although you don't live the exact same lives, although you've lived in different generations, had these different upbringings, you're not so different that you can't sit down and have a conversation. So that was kind of my goal as I was writing the novel. I had my grandmother, she's here with me today, in the back of my mind while I was writing it all the time. So all the things that I would hear her say, anytime I was writing the older character, Betty, I was thinking, would Graham have said this? Can I imagine Graham having done this? Most of the time I can. She's told me some great stories over the years. So I think that helped make it realistic, knowing like there is a real person there that I can picture in my mind. Like there she is, she's that person that I can like kind of cement that on. Yeah, she had talked, I mean, even my parents as well would talk about places in Worcester that I never experienced, like Central Mass. So they would say things like Zares. I never went. I have no idea. So they would talk about these places, and I just decided, I understand what they are. I kind of Googled and made sure I had the right idea, talked to people, and just included those as like background in the book as well to make it a little bit more realistic and grounded in an actual place, so that as you're reading, you see like real people, real places, and hopefully it comes through.
So how long did it take you to write the book?
Maybe a little over 2 years. But it was not like consecutive. I started like pre-COVID and then didn't write for a little while, and then COVID happened, so I felt like we all had that time. We're at home, like, what am I going to do now? So I picked up the book again, and I was like, okay, I'm going to finish with all this downtime at home. So in some ways, not that COVID was a blessing, but COVID was a blessing. So
The COVID creativity.
yes. So everyone's doing puzzles. I'm writing a novel. I've always loved to write. When I went to college, I had a writing professor. I was a history major, and it was like writing 101, and she pulled me into the office and was like, please switch majors. Please be a writing major. And I was like, my parents would kill me. Like, I'm going to school right now to be a teacher, and you want me to go home and say, well, I'm just going to write. So I kind of just blew that off. But it's always been something I've loved to do, and I hope I'm good at. So, okay, I'll read the first section of the book. So the first section of the book starts off with Olivia's point of view. So Olivia is the younger of the characters. Have you seen my passport? Olivia called out from her disheveled bedroom. No, where are you going? Olivia's mother asked, poking her head into the bedroom to see her throwing things in every direction. Europe, she replied flatly. Where in Europe? You can't just tell me a continent, her mother snapped. I don't know for sure yet. I found a cheap flight to Barcelona, and I'll make a plan when I get there. What? Is this a joke? When are you leaving? She asked in a panic. I'm leaving tonight, and no, it's not a joke. Olivia turned away from her mother and went back to focusing on packing. She didn't have her usual packing list or any type of plan for when she arrived. She was packing light, strictly essentials. She folded 2 pairs of jeans, 3 pairs of shorts, 1 skirt, 1 dress, 5 shirts, sneakers, sandals, a bathing suit, enough underwear for a week, and a few toiletries. 1 suitcase would suffice. She figured she wouldn't have much time to get settled and unpack anywhere, so there was no point in taking too much. And what did you need to buy? What did you need to get by anyway? There are stores everywhere. Olivia, I think we should talk about this. Talk about what? Olivia asked, rolling her eyes. Where is this coming from? You're not a spontaneous person. What about that internship? You won't understand. Try me. Will you just drive me to the airport in a few hours? Of course I will. That doesn't mean I don't think you're being ridiculous. I wish you'd talk to me about this. I have to keep packing and find my passport. I don't have time to talk. Olivia had tried to stay calm and collected with her mother, but she was actually thinking that she was sick of talking. She just needed silence and distance from everyone in her life. What had once been so clear and organized had become too difficult to sustain. No one had ever put any pressure on her to be on a certain life path, but it always felt implied. Even the constant reminders that we are never truly where we will end up in life seemed like a challenge to her. It always seemed important to Olivia that she be the best, that she prove everyone wrong. And so when her parents told her she couldn't do something, the voice in her head simply laughed at their lack of faith. Didn't they know by now she could do anything? The voice in her head, her conscience, her personal Jiminy Cricket had gotten this one all wrong, and Olivia had no idea what to do about it. The voicemail from the head of the internship at the Library of Congress had been brief and dry. Miss Stanford, I wanted to thank you for your application. We have taken the time to review your qualifications and potential. Unfortunately, we are not able to offer you an internship at this time. You're welcome to apply again in the fall. She listened to it over and over again. Why would she have ever felt qualified enough for something like that to begin with? So we'll find something from Betty so we can see the opposite perspective.
Can I just ask you a question? Yeah. So she lied to her mother saying that she did have the internship when she really didn't? Because her mother said, where are you going? You have an internship.
Right. So the mother was saying, like, what about, like, if you get the internship is what I was.
Oh, okay.
So
but she knows she didn't.
she already knew she hadn't gotten it, but the mother was assuming that she would have it because she got everything she put her mind to. So
Okay.
it seemed, yeah.
How much of that do you see is being personal? How much of that do you see as being kind of a generational perspective?
I don't think, like, personally that I had a lot of pressure and that I always thought I could do anything. But I do think, like, growing up, like, my parents were always like, you can do whatever you put your mind to. So anything you think you can do, if you try hard enough, you can do. So I definitely think in that way, it's personal, right? Like, so when that doesn't happen, you're like, oh, how did I fall short? But not to that extent. And I do think that a lot of people that I grew up with had similar feelings. So maybe it falls into both generational and personal, or just human and wanting to be the best you can be at everything.
But I mean, how much of that is also that we are told that we can be the best at everything, but in practice, that kind of discourages us from finding what we're really good at.
Right, like you're just like, oh, I can do whatever, so you're not trying too hard.
No, I think more intense in the sense of I think it encourages people to spread themselves too thin rather than focus on what they're really good at, what they would really enjoy.
Yeah, I could see that. I think that's a good point too. Right, I think that does happen to a lot of people. You notice, like, you don't have a sustained career so much now in, like, a younger generation. Everyone is, like, not wanting to stay in a job because, like, well, I could do something better than this. And I think that's a pretty prominent attitude now. Like, oh, well, I can just do something else. I don't need this. So I think that's a good point to make too. Okay, so I'll read a little bit about the interaction with Olivia and Betty. So Betty is the older woman, and Olivia, like we just read, is the younger woman. They meet when they go to board the plane in Boston. So here they're sitting next to each other, and the old woman starts to question Olivia. What's going on in that head of yours? Betty asked. Too much, Olivia answered candidly. The old woman had drawn her out of her memory and forced her to face the present moment. Olivia realized that even after the first encounter she'd shared with Cole, she wasn't sure if the feelings were real, never mind mutual. It seemed like Betty had a firm grasp on love, what it meant to be in love. Olivia figured she had experienced a perfect romance with Jack. She talked more to Jack, who was dead, than Olivia talked to Cole, and he had been right in front of her, completely accessible. She wondered what the secret was. Anything I can help you work out? Still thinking about Cole? Betty asked gently. I don't know how much you'll be able to help. I get the impression that you have a perfect life. Far from it. Olivia had her doubts. What was far from perfect in this woman's mind was probably a few burnt dinners that her husband didn't eat. Maybe the kids spilled grape juice on her new white carpet. She just seemed like she had to have gone through life without having experienced any doubts or setbacks. Even with her doubts, Olivia smiled at Betty sympathetically, hoping the woman couldn't tell how little faith she had that Betty knew anything but ease and simplicity. I bet you met your husband in high school, got married as soon as possible, and lived a blissfully happy life, Olivia blurted out. Well, sarcastic attitude aside, you're not entirely wrong. The problem is that things can look perfect. They may even sound perfect at first. But until you hear the whole story, you'll never understand how messy things can be. Olivia felt like she had been caught red-handed, stealing candy from a baby. Why would she be anything but kind to this sweet old lady? The grimace on her face betrayed her, and Betty knew she'd gotten her attention. Oh, don't worry about doubting me, Betty said. Olivia's usually pale face had turned a shade of deep red, resembling a ripe tomato. It started with her cheeks, but moved quickly to her neck and ears. Luckily, she was wearing a sweater that hid the fact that the bright red hue had spread to her chest. Her eyes were burning. She was incredibly embarrassed, but she just nodded and smiled at Betty. I'd love to tell you my story if you'd like hearing about a boring old lady who always had life figured out, Betty said with a smile. I'd love to hear it. Olivia's grandparents, both maternal and paternal, had lots of stories, but they weren't exactly relatable. Or maybe she didn't want to relate to her grandparents when it came to love. She would never tell them about her insecurities with Cole, never mind any bigger issues she was facing. To them, she was perfect, and that's how she intended to keep it. It's a good thing we have a long way to go, still, Betty said. Her story was long, and she wanted Olivia to hear all of it. She believed there was a lot to be learned from people who experienced life before you. Faced with telling a long and complicated story made Betty pause to gather her thoughts and decide where to start. She had been waiting for years to tell this story, so you would think she was more than ready to begin, but when it came time to open up, she was temporarily paralyzed by uncertainty. The beginning, Betty. Start from the beginning, she heard Jack's voice echo in her mind. She was struggling to tell stories from the right starting point. She would assume people knew things and go right for the juicier details. Jack helped reel her in a little, but this time she knew the beginning. She knew how Olivia would be able to relate to her story. She needed to tell it from where it began, 57 years earlier. So you were right. I did meet my husband in high school, and it was a typical teenage puppy love kind of stuff to begin with. With that disclaimer included, Betty started to paint the picture for Olivia. In her mind, it played like a movie she had seen 100 times. It always started the same way. After school one day, she had gone down to get a soda, and that's where her fate would change. Betty walked into the soda fountain and noticed a strong, burly young man standing in the corner. She had seen him around before, but that day, when their eyes met and she witnessed an undeniably gorgeous smile form and complete his already perfect appearance, she was hooked. I was with my girlfriends and he was with his guy friends, but that didn't stop us. We split off, and the rest, as they say, is history. Olivia had figured as much. She'd met a guy when she was very young, and they locked eyes and never looked back. Betty seemed to understand that. She needed to be a little more specific. She knew that from the outside looking in, things looked like they'd gotten off to a perfect start. They kind of did, though. I know, perfect, easy, and lucky are all words people would use to describe my love life after that. And for a while, there is no denying it was. She remembered her first date with Harry like it was yesterday. When Harry and I left the soda fountain, he asked if I would let him buy me an ice cream the next day. And I couldn't say no. He was the first boy to ever ask me out. I was 15, and boy was I smitten. Now Olivia's mind was really racing. I thought her husband's name was Jack. What is happening here? Is this old lady senile? Olivia wondered silently. Betty smiled as she realized the confusion that was creeping over her seatmate. In good time, dear, she thought. Yeah, there is the start of Betty's story there as well.
We need to find out.
Yes. I don't want to give away too much. I want to read the whole thing.
Just like a preview.
Right. Yeah. So I figured reading the part where she is talking to Jack, but was she married to Jack? Well, not really. Maybe. We'll find out. Jack, as you hear my grandmother in the back, she had a brother named Jack. So absolutely. I love the writing process because I kind of strive in that like isolation that it's just me and the computer, the paper, like I don't have to worry about anything else. I also worked with a writing group that really helped a lot. So that was a fun experience. I'm still working with them on new things to come, but a while out. So getting the opportunity to work with other talented writers was fantastic for me. And if someone is out there writing, I highly recommend you find a writing group because it's good to have that like group to bounce your ideas off of, that they read it as you're writing it and you can fix it, figure out where you're falling short, go from there. But then getting the cover design was incredible. I love that. I actually was fortunate. I had a cousin who had just graduated from college with a degree in graphic design, and he was very excited to help design the cover. And I don't know, but I think he did a great job. So yeah, I think it's good.
What's his name so we can give him some credit?
Brady Weldon. He did a great job. I think if you're looking for someone to make your cover for your book, I'll do a little sales pitch for him. Definitely reach out. So yeah, that was a great experience. But when the books actually came in, when I got to open that box and like see them and hold them and feel the cover, like that was probably the most exciting moment. I mean, I'm on the floor trying to open the box, and I have my crazy dog jumping on me, like, what are you doing? So that was great. They did a good job of ruining the first video or making it better. I can't decide. The dog jumping on me as I opened the books was kind of fun. But yeah, it was a great experience. I gave her a treat so she would go away, but yes. Yes, my destructive dogs probably would eat it if they had the chance.
What was your process of actually, how did you publish it? Did you go through a publisher? Did you do Amazon type self-publishing, or how did you work it?
So I did a lot of research, and I discovered that when you publish through Ingram Spark, it's the same as publishing with someone who can sell directly to bookstores. And so that felt like the easier way for me. I definitely was querying agents and, all the traditional publishing stuff. It's very hard. If you're doing it, more power to you. Congratulations. I'm jealous. Awesome. But it's rough out there. So I did a lot of writing letters, and then I just decided, I can get this done faster. And so I went that route.
What group were you part of that, the writers group that was so helpful?
So there's a website called Bardsy, and they have, I feel like they've changed the names, but they called it an advanced writers program. And so you would submit some of your writing, they would decide if you were a good fit, and
So it wasn't like an in-person one?
No, we do, they're kind of like Zoom calls.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, it's actually really fun, I think, for like the distance, because I have people in my group that are from California and, the Carolinas, like we're kind of all over the country. So it's interesting for me to see all the different perspectives from around the country, not just right here, because the New England bubble is exactly that, just a New England bubble.
And are you writing something at the moment? Are you planning to publish something else soon?
I don't know how soon. I'm writing now. I don't know how long it will take. I have a very firm idea. It's going well. So I don't know. It's very different from what's here. It's more of a serial killer murder mystery sort of book in the next one. So, but I've done some freelance work, nonfiction, but very small, like small articles about like Disney World and traveling, things like that. Yeah, I've not traveled extensively in Europe. I wish I could, but I've been to like Iceland, England, Ireland. That's it. So.
Did you do it on a budget as well?
Always on a budget.
So do you think like your environment is a huge influence on you and writing? If you're pitching your drafts to the group, the book group or the critique group, and they're from all over the country, do you have to change things that are too New England-esque and stuff like that?
Yes, actually, I submitted something and I referred to a blinker. Like you turn on the blinker and they're like, no. Like, what is that? Blinker is not a noun. Why? Like, I was like, yes, it is. I don't know what you're talking about. So like, no, that would be a directional light. You know, I'm like, no, you just turn on the blinker. Like, what? So it's definitely interesting to see the slight difference in vocabulary. Like, you're speaking the same language, but so different. Different dialects that go beyond the like dropping the R. And
Right.
I love writing dialogue. I don't know. There are other writers that I talk to who like hate when I say this, but I think it's the easiest part of writing because we talk to people all the time. And so when I'm writing, I try to write the way I would speak, which, I mean, it's hard, I guess, when you're switching between different perspectives, as I do in this book. I have to have two different voices going. But I think that writing dialogue is sometimes easier. There's not so much like flowery, you know, make it sound beautiful. Because if you're trying too hard to make it sound beautiful, like no one actually speaks that way. So I feel like because I can get straight to the like nitty gritty, I enjoy writing dialogue. So you won't find a lot of like flowery, like metaphors or anything in my book. Of course there are metaphors, but I don't know. I guess I just don't like to be overly artistic with my wording. I'd rather be more direct, even with the like descriptive stuff. I would hate for people to be like stuck and think like, I have no idea what this means, right? Like the whole purpose of writing is so that people get your story. And so I'm really hopeful that as you pick up the book, you understand and, you know, get to the heart of the story without having to overthink it. Maybe the ending, but I won't give that away.
I was curious about how you, I mean, you mentioned a lot of one of the characters is kind of, seems to be kind of based on you. Is the other character kind of based on you? Or did you kind of try to create a whole new character?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm in there somewhere, but I think it's hard to ever write a character that you're not part of. That's some small piece of you, even if it's just the voice somewhere in there, the writer's there. But I wasn't basing the character off of me. There are some things in there that I would admit came like more from real life. But the character is more a combination of people I've known through the years. Taking like things that people would say and putting that into one person. So trying to pull from different sections so that no one is like, hey, that's me.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Courtney, for coming today and for sharing your wonderful book with us. And you've left us with a cliffhanger.
It was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right there. Yeah. Right there.